light upon the water. "Oh," said Delmar as he recognized the boatman. "It's you. It's been a while." The boatman laughed. "It has been a little while, hasn't it? How are you?" Fine, considering." Delmar gestured vaguely to the rain and the floodwaters and the boat. The two of them shared a smile, like they had back then, and Delmar felt all the years fall away from him. It didn't last. A surge of floodwater caused the little boat to rise and fall, caught in the swell, and the boatman had to jam his pole into the cobbles of the drowned street to prevent himself being swept down towards the crossroads. "I think that goes for all of us," he said, when the floodwaters had settled down a little. "I didn't know you were in the city." "My sister Aylmer lives here," said Delmar. "I came as soon as I heard what was coming. I didn't know you were back in the city either." "I'm working with the Aguirre." The Naga looked a little uncomfortable, turned his head slightly. The Aguirre reckoners had a certain reputation in Tasato, but Delmar was an outsider and was oblivious. "You still have the petrichor, though?" The boatman smiled, face half hidden in his sodden hood. "Of course I do," he said. "When I die, they'll bury me with this boat." "I remember you used to say that a lot." Delmar held the boatman's golden-eyed gaze, the silence stretching a little, disturbed only by the patter-patter-patter of the rain. Then, from the room behind Delmar, there was a tumultuous burst of shouting and the sound of a small child refusing to put on their outdoor coat. The moment broke. "Right now, though, I'm working for the Chamber of Commerce," said the boatman. "All business. We all are, anyone with a boat. They've opened up the School of Epistemology, and the Church of the Little Mother on Traperisko Street is above the floodwaters, so a lot of people are gathering there. It's cramped and loud, but it's safe and as dry as a place you'll find in Mestra or Rojaria right now. I'm just on my way back out, but I heard the shouting, so I thought I'd see if someone needed help. Didn't expect it to be you. And when I opened the window, I didn't expect it to be you either. Let me speak to Aylmer. There's herself and 3 children and a dog. Have you got room?" "Always. What about you?" "I'll be fine. I'm not scared of a little water, and there's plenty of other people who need help." "You could come help me," said the boatman. Another timeless moment of silence and rain. For a moment it looked like Delmar might take the boatman up on his offer. In the end, though, he shook his head. "It's a nice idea, Jacques, but I'd just be taking up space on the petrichor that would be better left by someone who actually needs your help." The boatman nodded, accepted Delmar's decision, and however he felt, he did not let it show on his face. Between them they lowered Aylmer and the 3 boys and an enthusiastically barking dog out of the window into the petrichor. Raising his hand in farewell, the boatman began to pole expertly down the flooded street. The boys waved enthusiastically back at Delmar, but the boatman didn't look back. Delmar was sure of that because he watched them go, leaning out the window, ignoring the thundering rain, until the boat turned into Wormling Street, and he couldn't see them any more.
The Great Drought of 384YE has instead become the Great Storm of 384YE. During the summer solstice, Imperial magicians cast both Thunderous Deluge and Regrow the Land's Heart, using the special resonance imparted by a conjunction of the Wanderer, the Fountain, the Stallion, and the Lock. This caused the curse and the enchantment to spread unchecked across the entire Empire, or at least to every territory that was Imperial at that time. Due to the nature of resonance, the rituals have no direct effect on Bregersland, Zenith, Leathaven, Brakeliand, or the Barons. They simply had to endure the drought. That is not to say there have not been indirect effects from the 3 months of magically infused storms. Out of character note, players are encouraged to weave the events of the Empire-wide storms and flooding into their own stories, remembering the key details that while the rain has been atrocious, the damage it has caused has been somewhat mitigated by the combination of magic used. In particular, there has been little loss of life, no worse than might have happened during a particularly bad storm of natural origin. Destructive Tempest. There have been torrential downpours and devastating storms across the Empire. Every farm and business has suffered the loss of half of its production. Every mine has lost a rank of production due to flooding or stopping mines from being flooded. The great storm of 384YE begins gently, with soft rain that refreshes the body and the spirit, infused with the renewing spring magic by Regrow the Land's Heart enchantment. The magic breaks the effects of the drought across the Empire. It also encourages growth of plants and trees damaged by war or natural disaster. If it stopped there, then this season would have been remembered as one of hope and renewal. Unfortunately, it does not stop there. Within a week or so of the summer solstice, the first peals of thunder roar out across the Empire, and the gentle rains become considerably less gentle. Torrential downpours, accompanied by bolts of deadly lightning and howling winds, sweep across the Empire. If anyone were in a position to track them on a map, a knot of black clouds would seem to emanate from Casanea. Yet, that is not the only place these fulgurous storm clouds are gathering. They also surge inwards from the borders of the Empire, rushing to meet the expanding tempest emanating from the Imperial Regio. The storms then proceed to batter the Empire for the better part of 3 months. There are occasional breaks in the cloud cover, but they do not last long. Occasionally, the power of the gentle enchantment breaks through, and the rains become renewing, rather than destructive. But this interlude also fails to last for more than a few hours at a time. Crops are pummeled flat, rivers burst their banks, earth is transformed into sucking mud. It takes all the effort of farmers to preserve even a portion of their crops. The rising waters mean businesses across the Empire are flooded, or drowned, or simply find it increasingly difficult to ply their trades. Mine owners spend the weeks ensuring the water does not cause their mines to flood, or dealing with the repercussions where they are unable to do so. Some places are better prepared than others. The people of Sarvos, for example, have been taking precautions against potential doom striking the city since Scath laid her curse on them. Fortunately, those same precautions helped them endure the effects of the terrible storms with minimal lasting damage. Not everywhere has been as lucky, however. A fortnight before the autumn equinox, the rain begins to slacken off. Thunder is less frequent, lightning strikes more intermittent. The rain turns gentle again. And then, one fine morning, the sun comes out over Anvil, and just like that, the weather returns to normal. Participation. Feel free to tell tales of the terrible storm and how it affected you, especially if you own a farm, business, resources that have had their production halved, or mine, resources that have lost a rank of production to the threat of flooding. Raised by magic, the damage these storms have caused has primarily been property damage. While a few people have lost their lives, there are a tiny fraction of those that might have been killed if the tempest was entirely natural in origin. Remember that the storms have not hit the territories that were not part of the Empire during the autumn equinox, which means Bregersland, Zenith, Liathavan, Brikeliand, and the Barrens were untouched. Gentle Renewal. Regrow the Land's Heart was targeted at Casanea, but the effect spreads to affect all Imperial territories. This enchantment will mitigate the effects of the drought, but will also lead to extensive flooding. The storms have faded, but the spring magic does not go with them. It remains in every puddle, in every new stream, in the floodwaters themselves. Where the storms brought destruction, they have also promoted new life. Over the next several months, that magic will bring rejuvenation wherever it brought destruction. During the downtime following the autumn equinox, every herb garden in the Empire will produce an additional 4 random herbs in the wake of the storms. Likewise, every forest and farm owner will be able to claim 2 random herbs, produced as a consequence of the spring-infused rain. Businesses and mines, however, will receive nothing. It is also noticeable that where the rains have touched, fresh new life has begun to flourish. In the wake of the terrible storms, many people find it easier to abandon grudges or find old bitterness seems less appealing than once it did. As the waters begin to recede, it is more often a case of cleaning out the mud and filth and the last few puddles, throwing away damp carpets, than it is in rebuilding from the ground up. In all these cases, the quiet enchantment of regrow the land's heart has served to renew and restore, where thunderous deluge would have simply destroyed. Participation. Any character can decide that exposure to the gentler rains has washed away any grudge, bitterness, prejudice, lingering pain, or bad memory their character was holding on to. In the case of memories, they are not gone. The rain has no effect on anyone's recollections. But any emotional pain associated with them has been washed away as well. Likewise, you can decide that any or all of your character's vengeful thoughts, bitterness, aggrieved feelings, or memory of upsetting events has been lessened by the rain, and they were able to find some peace with the past. Sodden ground. As a result of the tempest, several regions across the Empire have gained the marsh quality. The destructive nature of the rains has made marshes much more treacherous and dangerous than they have been previously. Building in regions with the marsh quality is now more difficult. The rains had a marked effect on areas where the ground is naturally wet. Several regions across the Empire have permanently gained the marsh quality. The region of Utterland in Holberg is now a marsh as well as a forest. The rains in Holberg have meant that the Great Pits of Enneland have seen some of the worst flooding since Enneland first reverted to being part of the morass, but the Boar Seat has weathered the worst of it without permanent damage. Unexpected aid comes to the League in the shape of sandfisher orcs. Once it becomes clear what is happening, they enthusiastically pitch in, working hard under directions from their neighbours to shore up flood defences and dig channels for water to drain away, helping to ensure that any flooding of the city itself, or any of the smaller estates scattered around the territory, is minimised. Further south, in Cyrene, the region of East Ring has likewise gained the marsh quality as the waters of the Fever Water rise. The Navarre and the Great Forest Orcs are able to mitigate the worst of the rain in the territory, but it is no easy task. It seems that the forests of Lustry and Nasutak Forest endure the storm better, but they are significantly more swampy than they used to be where they border the lake. Price of the marshes. For at least the next year, any commission built in a region with the marsh quality will have its labour costs increased by a fifth. Even where the rains have not fallen themselves, the impact of the storms has been felt. Marshes across the Empire and in neighbouring territories have become deeper and more dangerous. There is a lot more groundwater pooling in these regions than ever before, and it shows little signs of abating. Indeed, water from neighbouring regions drains slowly into the marshy areas, generally low-lying areas to begin with, and compounds the issues. For at least the next year, any commission built in the region with the marsh quality will see an additional fifth added to the labour cost to construct it. This is in addition to any other extra costs, such as those inflicted by the underdeveloped quality in parts of Ossium. Right now, the civil service cannot say for certain, but it is possible that this change may well take significantly longer than a year to fade away, and might be permanent without extensive draining and building of levees and dams. While the conjunction meant the rituals used didn't directly affect territories outside the Empire, the additional water has broadly ignored territorial boundaries. As such, this change to labour costs of commissions in marshy areas does apply to Bregersland, Zenith, Leathaven, Brickeliand, and the Barrens. Flooded Tassato. The Vassar breaks its banks. The Imperial Mint sustains significant water damage. A new Ilium resource has been uncovered. We, the priests of the League, understand that flooding is coming to Tassato. We encourage all citizens to make preparations as quickly as they can and work with their neighbours to protect their property. Families and guilds, vigilance calls us to be prepared for threats, and through our vigilance we can protect the prosperity of Tassato. Ophelia Sanguinero Resia de Tassato, League Assembly, Summer Solstice 384YE. Greater majority, 252 votes for, none against. With the advanced warning of the League Assembly and the urging of the bishops, Tassato is as prepared for the coming floods as it can possibly be. The waters rise inexorably, not only from the rain that falls on the city itself, but from the accumulated effect of the rain falling on the hills to the north. Sandbags are deployed, but the defences Tassato maintains against the risk of flooding in the spring are insufficient to deal with the sheer volume of water pouring through the city. The warning issued by Ophelia Sanguinero Resia de Tassato gives the people of Maestra and Rigario precious little time to prepare, but they use it as best they can. The words of the League Assembly doubtless prevent significant damage to the locks of the Sapphire Stair at least. The locks are opened and the waters of the angry river are allowed to flow freely, rather than attempting to hold them back. In the end, the preparations only delay the inevitable. As waters rise, they eventually break over makeshift dams and flood out into the city, indiscriminately washing away anything that falls into their grasp. For a few weeks, the people on both sides of the river are united by shared adversity. Food, and especially fresh water untainted by the sewers and the filth of the streets, are very much in demand, as are simple things so often taken for granted like dry clothes. The streets become reminiscent of the canals of Sarvos, but narrower and with many more drowned rats. Most travel through the flooded city is by boat. The flat-bottomed skiffs and gondolas that once ferried citizens back and forth across the river are now the main means of moving everything. Water and food tainted with floodwater brings with it the threat of sickness. Physics and healers versed in the Purify spell have their work cut out for them. The damage is extensive, but nowhere more so than the Imperial Mint that stands in the middle of the Vassa. In the past, the walls have proven capable of dealing with the occasional flood, but this is something different. The gates present a weak spot, allowing the water to stream in. Supplies must be shipped in and lifted up to the walls with ropes and baskets. Opening the gates would let the Vassa pour in and do incalculable damage. As the flood continues, it becomes more and more likely the walls may well actually be breached by the questing river fingers. Eventually, the rains stop, and the waters begin to recede. But they are taking their time about it. As the autumn equinox begins, the streets near the river are still flooded to a depth of around 3 feet. Where the waters have receded, they have left extensive damage. The Tasato Chamber of Commerce takes charge as best it can, working to deal with the worst of the damage, and, with the help of the Church of the Little Mother, they set about making sure that disease, hunger, and thirst are kept in check. Taming the Vassa. Tasato is still suffering after the effects of the flood. Repairing the extensive damage to the city will require 50 thrones and take 3 months. Until the damage is repaired, or until the start of the autumn equinox 385 YE, every business in Tasato will continue to suffer 1 rank of penalty to production. The damage to the city is extensive, and while individual buildings can be cleaned and repaired, the city as a whole has suffered greatly under the floodwaters. The Imperial Senate can instruct the civil service to divert resources to aiding the cleanup effort and reinforcing the flood defences of the city. This will cost the Senate 50 thrones, but will restore the city sufficiently to remove the penalty to businesses. Alternatively, if the Senate refuses to pay, it will take a year for the damage inflicted on Tasato to be fully repaired. Regrow the land's heart can help, but only so far. If the enchantment is placed on Tasato, it will reduce the amount of time required for the city to recover naturally by a single season. The Imperial Mint. Hidden underground chambers have been located at the Imperial Mint. The waters of the Vassa are slowly receding, but the Imperial Mint is still sealed against the river. During the course of dealing with the floods, a series of additional chambers and passages were located under the mint itself. These secret chambers are actually more like forgotten rooms, accessed through a door hidden behind a weirwood cabinet in a small office on the first floor. A flight of narrow stairs give access to a series of cellar rooms. Neither the staircase nor the lower rooms appear on any plan of the Imperial Mint. The rooms are, predictably, completely flooded. A couple of Mero members of staff engage in basic exploration of the revealed area and indicate that they are reasonably extensive. Some of the rooms are below the bottom of the Vassa. There are also signs that they were built to withstand river water. There are watertight doors down there that may actually open into air-filled rooms. For the time being, they are impossible to get at, unfortunately without risking whatever is in there being destroyed by the floodwater. Given these rooms almost certainly date back to at least the time of Emperor Giovanni, nobody is keen to risk damaging anything that might be down there. Even as the Vassa subsides, access to whatever is down there may not be easy. One of the civil servants, an engineer from Holberg University, suggests that some pumps used in the mines might be sufficient to clear enough water to do a proper exploration of what is down there. They estimate that if the Master of the Imperial Mint can provide 5 thrones, the rooms can be drained at least temporarily. It will be important to move quickly, however. There is no telling how long any valuables will survive exposure to river water. One other detail raises some concern. One of the Merrow explorers was quite affected by their time in the flooded cellars and refused to return to them. She claimed that the place had a unpleasant aspect, a resonance that reminded her very much of the dramatological tomb. Out of character note, if the Master of the Mint wishes to authorise this expenditure, they will need to ensure the money is in their inventory and email Profound Decisions at plot@profouндecisions.co.uk after the event. The good news. A supply of ilium has been uncovered in the hills about Tessato Maestra. The Vassar may have burst its banks and flooded the city, but there is a glitter of gold in the waters, or more specifically, the sparkle of ilium. Several small ingots of ilium are recovered from the Vassar over the course of the last few months. The Civil Service have confirmed that the torrential rain has washed through the largely played-out mines in the northern hills and uncovered deposits of ilium in the abandoned caves. The guilds that own most of the mines in the hills above Tessato Maestra are old, traditional, and a little set in their ways, but they recognise an opportunity when they see it. The Forge and Furnace Fellowship, led by the ambitious Gemma Stewart of Tessato, are one of the richest mining guilds in the city. Since she took her place in Tessatan politics, Gemma has publicly committed herself to changing the fortunes of Tessato and tapping into the rich veins of ore she is now convinced still lie beneath the hills above the city. She is quick to offer the aid of her guild, both in exploiting the new resource and in convincing the merchant princes of the other mining guilds to support the city. The Civil Service believe that if the Tessatan hills were properly exploited, they would provide 6 rings of ilium each season as a bourse seat. Gemma Stewart claims that much of the infrastructure needed to get the ilium is already in place, and what is not can be secured relatively easily from Holberg or Temeshwar. Getting the ilium seat up and running would cost only 75 thrones, provided the Civil Service were assured of the cooperation of the League guilds. If they were required to do all of the work via the Civil Service, it would require 250 thrones to exploit the ilium resources of the Tessatan hills. Gemma is not too proud to engage in blackmail. If the Imperial Senate wants the aid of the Tessatan mining guilds, they must assign the Tessato Hills as a League national position appointed each year by the tally of the votes. If they would prefer to make it an Imperial position appointed by the auction of the seats, then they would have to pay through the nose to purchase the mines and the equipment and employ workers to actually extract the precious star metal. A single Senate motion can be used to create the new bourse resource and allocate it as Imperial or National. There is no particular time limit here. The mining guilds, the ilium, and the hills are not going anywhere.
Semilac Flotsam. The torrential rains have caused the waters of the Semilac, prone to terrible storms at the best of times, to rise dramatically. The worst of the resulting flooding is felt in the town of Cullich in Weirwater, but none of the settlements along the shores of the lake are spared. In Cullich, the drowned bells are heard in summer for the first time ever, as near as anyone can tell, and it is seen as something of an ill omen by many of the Yeofolk. The flooding in Laker, Iversgard, Corotney, and the vales along Bittershore has been less pronounced, but still has left many people forced to move to upper stories or seek safety on higher ground. The waters recede slowly, but they do recede. In their wake, they leave, well, it wouldn't be right to call it treasure as such. Most of it is rubbish, broken pots, bits of weirdly shaped wood, corroded hunks of metal. Occasionally, however, something of actual value is discovered. Old coins, metalwork that has not corroded, beautifully painted bowls, carved pieces of wood that show no sign of water damage, little figurines and the like. For some people, especially children, this combination of junk and treasure presents an almost irresistible lure. They brave the slippery mud and treacherous waters looking for loot they can show off to their friends or barter to collectors. Not only children either. Once it becomes clear that there are a few interesting items among the dross, it begins to attract the curious and those prepared to take risks in the hope of finding something valuable. As a result of these strange treasures, every business in a territory bordering the Semilac will receive either an additional 2 crowns or 2 random ingots of rare metal during the winter solstice. The affected territories are Semiholm, Weirwater, Karsk, Karov, and Ossium. Holberg will not benefit from this unlooked-for bounty, as the city itself does not border the lake. There is some speculation that this peculiar bounty from the Semilac might be connected to the strange dreams experienced by the people of Weirwater following the summer solstice. A few urchins report finding strange hoof marks in the wet sand along the shore, but these reports have so far not been substantiated by anyone over the age of 10. Dorwala's gifts. Not everyone is intrigued by this bounty from the depths of the Semilac. Some Varushkan wise ones and Dornish troubadours raise a note of caution. The Varushkans speak of Dorwala, the dreadful lake monster that lures anyone who takes the lake's bounty for granted to their death. Troubadours tell the story of Sedaret, the cursed Dornish town that apparently lies beneath the waves east of Kulich. Both groups urge people to leave the treasures where they are and keep their children away from the banks of the Semilac until the waters of the lake can reclaim these shiny lures. The Semilac is not to be trusted. Dorwala waits in its depths to claim those who foolishly come too close. We send named priest with 25 doses of Liao to discourage any Varushkan from foolishly claiming the trinkets left behind by the receding waters. Synod Mandate, Varushkan National Assembly. Within the depths of the Semilac is the cursed town of Sedarat, and while the waters are rich, not every gift they offer is meant to be taken. We send named priest with 50 doses of Liao to discourage the people of Dawn from meddling with these apparent treasures. Let the waters reclaim them. Synod Mandate, Dawn National Assembly. If one of these mandates is upheld, it will remove the additional production of businesses in territories belonging to that nation. All save the most foolish or desperate will leave the trinkets alone and let them sink into the mud or be reclaimed by the Semilac. It is entirely possible that one nation will enact their mandate and the other does not, in which case businesses in the other nation will gain an additional 2 crowns as collectors focus their efforts in that nation. Mead and the Marches. The Marchers are no strangers to bad weather, but the torrential rain hits the Marches very hard indeed. The rains pummel their crops, drown their animals and flood the market towns. The river Mead bursts its banks, flooding parts of Mitwold, Upwold and the Morn. The people endure, but they are hardly happy about it. There is a great deal of grumbling about the fact that the Empire has done this to its own people, and this raises serious questions about the recent mandates regarding the threshers. Threshing. In their response to the drought and conjunction, the Empire have exchanged life-threatening drought with disadvantages for life-threatening floods with advantages. If they rest at regrow the land's heart, then this is not malign. Nicholas Reaper, Marches Assembly, Summer Solstice 384YE. Upheld 120-0, a greater majority. Those threshers who pay more attention to the words of Galen Embercast are all for heading to Anvil and engaging in a little rough justice against whoever it was decided it was a good idea to unleash torrential rain as a response to a drought, when they had the option of gentle rain instead. Those who favour the words of Jenny Arbour argue that the conclave would surely not have taken such extreme action lightly, and that it is not only the Marches that have been affected. The two groups do not reach any kind of consensus, but at the end of the day it seems that most threshers are adopting a wait-and-see policy. While crops have been ruined, actual loss of life is limited to the foolish and the unlucky. But if this turns out to be the start of a trend for using destructive magic on Imperial citizens, then all bets are off. The other thing the Threshers agree on is that, as a sign of good faith, they would like the Marcher Assembly to investigate and determine the names of the magicians involved in performing the thunderous deluge curse at Anvil. Presumably, given this was done with the approval of the Conclave, there should be no reason to keep those names secret. Both groups would like the Assembly to raise a statement of principle including those names. There's no hint of anyone doing anything precipitous with this information. Both groups of threshers want the names so they can keep an eye on them, as is entirely within their remit. If the Assembly is able to determine the names and raises the statement of principle, it will do much to take the wind out of the sails of those critical of the decision to curse the Empire with storms. If they do not, it will make it easier for those already critical of the Assembly to paint them as being complicit in the destructive curse that has ravaged the March's farms. River roads. Mournwold was once among the most prosperous jewels of the Empire, and by our best efforts is well on its way to being so again. Opportunities are ready and waiting to be acted upon, particularly with offers made in Sarcum since being granted a charter by the late Imperatrix. Construction of the Sarcum Register and the Bounders' Hall are a testament to this. We encourage all those looking to investing in the Mournwold, investing in Sarcum. Henry Fletcher, March's Assembly, Summer Solstice 384 YE. Upheld 120 to 0, a greater majority. The flooding of the River Mead, coupled with the statement of principle by Henry Fletcher, raises talk of an opportunity, however. A couple of years ago there was some idle talk about a great western canal running through Mitwold and Mournwold and linking Mead to Sarcum. The project never seemed to go anywhere, but the recent flooding has caused some people to take another look at the project. One of the advantages of dredging out the River Mead, of turning it into a more navigable waterway, would be that steps could also be taken to head off any future catastrophic flooding. It would be an excellent way to invest in the prosperity of the Mournwold, and in Sarcum in particular. A sardonic alderman points out that it might even go some way toward making up for the wealth lost to the nation with the abrogation of Moonwater Hall in Upwold. Instead of trading with religious fanatics from outside the Empire, she suggests, we could focus on trading with our imperial neighbours for a little while. The canal is not a cheap project and will take some time to complete. The benefits would primarily be felt in Mitwold and Mournwold. Every business in each territory would receive a share of 560 rings. Every farm in Mitwold would receive a share of 220 rings, on top of that provided by the breadbasket. And every mine in the Mournwold would share additional production equal to 50 ingots of metal. It would also link the two most prosperous settlements in the Marches, Sarcum and Mead. One additional opportunity has been presented by the Mournwold thralls, who are fascinated by the idea. They've never heard of anything on this scale, and also very happy with the Bounders' Hall being constructed in Sarcum. If the project is commissioned within the next 6 months, before the end of Spring Equinox 385 YE, they will throw their support behind it. Between donations of money and food and actual physical labour, the Orcs can contribute half the labour costs. 100 crowns. The presence of the Orcs working alongside the human marchers on the riverways would also cause them to become more familiar to the people of the northern marches. At the moment they are still a rare sight outside of the Mournwold. Any marcher knows how effective sharing punishing physical labour can be for breaking down barriers between people, and the gruelling work of widening and shoring up a river would be no exception. It's not clear what effect this might have, but it is likely to be positive. Should the marchers still have any interest in bringing the Orcs into their nation as neighbours in spirit as well as simple geography, making the marchers more familiar with them cannot hurt. Cyrene. Almost as if foreshadowing the storms that were to come, last season the mine of Cyrene's wisdom in Cyrene was hit by catastrophic floods. Many miners died or were lost, all the bodies are still to be recovered, and the winter magic-tainted waters flooded the streets of the town. The people of Cyrene reached out to the Silver Chalice for help, and with the support of the Conclave the Order responded. While the storms battered the rest of the Empire, the healers of the Silver Chalice worked to protect the people of Cyrene from further tragedy, treating wounds that resisted mundane attempts to heal them, and helping to disperse the cursed waters that had flown from the mine workings. People who might otherwise have slipped away into death have recovered from exposure to the tainted water, while the worst of the damage to animals and crops has been undone. The Silver Chalice rallied without thought of reward, and the people of Cyrene are grateful for that. In recognition of the aid they have been offered, the chapters of Cyrene have come together to pledge their support for the Silver Chalice. They have made a bequest to the Order of 2 vials of properly prepared water from the pool of Cyrene. Carefully bottled in glass vials silvered with welt silver, the waters enhance the capabilities of magicians practicing certain winter magic rituals relating to preservation and survival, although their precise capabilities are not common knowledge. While lives have been saved, the damage to the town caused by the summer floods has been compounded by the magical storms. People have lost their homes, and several of the buildings will need to be rebuilt. There is also a great deal of sorrow in Cyrene. Lives lost, lives ruined, that will linger for a generation. A performance of Regrow the Land's Heart focused on Cassinia will help to mitigate some of the damage to buildings, bodies and spirits. It will help the people rebuild, certainly, but it will not restore the dead to life, nor empty the mines of their life-draining waters. Cyrene's Wisdom. The mines of Cyrene's Wisdom remain flooded. For the time being, the Imperial Senate has chosen not to invest in the mine, nor to order minimum repairs. The mine is still producing ilium, but only because the civil service has offered very high wages to the miners. The good news is that this means it has already begun producing ilium again. Obviously, there is nothing to stop the Senate taking one of the other options up, either during the autumn equinox or in the future. Furthermore, since the thunderous deluge swept through the Empire, the waters have washed down even more ilium from the mountains, permanently increasing the production of Cyrene's Wisdom by an additional ring of ilium each season, starting after the autumn equinox. Madruga and Missing Liao. Flash flooding has disrupted the usually well-oiled systems transporting civil service goods to Anvil for the summit. A Madruga-based vault which held precious items awaiting transit, including a dose of true Lao, had to be hastily emptied when guards discovered it was already submerged a foot underwater. In the commotion of salvaging as much of the water-damaged cargo as possible, the dose of true Liao was never recovered. Considering all other items have been accounted for, the civil service have been forced to conclude that the dose was stolen by an opportunist taking advantage of the chaos caused by the flooding. There has been plenty of speculation as to where the dose has ended up. Many point to the Vieg as obvious culprits, suggesting that perhaps they planted agents among dock workers along the Madruga coast in the hopes of a chance to grab whatever they could from the civil service and blackmail the Senate for its return. Others have suggested this is retaliation for the raid on Asavea, perhaps conducted by a member of the plenum hidden among Maracosans. There are also those who have previously expressed their desire for a dose of true Liao. Jarmish princes have previously bothered the civil service about buying a dose, but have been unable to legally do so, and Sadogua had previously schemed his way into acquiring a dose of true Liao, and could perhaps have further use for it. Frankly, there are countless individuals and organisations both within and without the Empire who could have a motive for acquiring true Liao. Leonardo y del Toro y Requesa, Secretary-General of the Civil Service, will deliver further briefing to the gatekeepers during the summit once a full report of the situation has been gathered. The Thirsty Grasses. This last point is most likely only a curiosity. The great grasses in Madruga are a vast, fertile plain known for herds of animals, representing rich farms, and for a populace that keep themselves to themselves. The tumultuous Scorrero River runs along the southwestern borders until it empties into the sea near Siroc. In other parts of the Empire, the grasslands have been badly affected by the storms, vegetation washed away, the soil left sodden for weeks. Not so in the great grasses. Within a week of the last rain, the plains are as dry as a bone. If anything, they are drier than they were before the rain started, something that has begun to worry the citizens there more than the storms did. No explanation is currently forthcoming, and there is no sign of a Sentinel Gate conjunction leading to the area, at least not at the autumn equinox. Lingering effects. While the rains have stopped, a new life is coming from the destruction they caused. The Empire is still taking stock of the full extent of the damage. While the Vassa is the most obviously affected, and the damage it has inflicted on Tassato the most extreme, nowhere in the Empire have the waters receded entirely. There are some concerns about the Scorrero in particular, as well as the potential for damage to bridges such as the Spider's Dream. As such, the civil service warn their fellow citizens that the full cost of the storms may yet to be paid.